Hello and welcome to today's Ensure Effective Remote Workforce Strategy and Business Continuity webinar brought to you by Insight Cloud and Data Center Transformation Division. I'm Amanda Sharp, Marketing Specialist at Insight, and will be your moderator today. Before we begin, I wanted to cover a few housekeeping items. This webcast is designed to be interactive between you and the presenters. The webcast console you are looking at can be completely customized. You can resize or move any of the windows that you have open. If you have any questions during the webcast, you can click on the Q&A widget at the bottom and submit your question. All questions from this webcast will be captured. If you are experiencing any technical difficulties, please visit the webcast help guide by clicking on the question mark icon below the presentation window. The help guide covers common technical issues. I would now like to turn this presentation over to our presenter, Rob Parsons. Rob, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Amanda. And thank you all for joining us today. Looking forward to going through some really important remote workforce strategy and things that we help our customers with as they go to enable their elastic remote workforces, as well as some business continuity items as well. So to kick things off, I'll start by talking through a little bit of the agenda, what we're going to cover today. Starting with some introductions, let you get to know the folks who are on the phone with us. Going into the needs of the remote workforce, and then ultimately what we're seeing in the field with our customers and internally as well. And then talking about the path ahead, which is really the methodology and approach that we use to enabling a remote workforce and the steps that are taken and how we help our customers to get there. So some really good nuggets in there. And then ultimately the services and resources that we have available to help our customers to attack their own internal issues and really address these changing times as well. So with that, I'm Rob Parsons. I'm the Practice Director for Network and Integrated Security at Insight. Really excited to be here with you today. We also have Juan Orlandini, who's our Chief Architect, and Jason Rader, who is our Security Practice Director over Network and Cloud Security. So thanks, Juan. Thanks, Jason, for joining me today. Really excited to have you here. To start things off, I'll hand it over to Juan. Perfect. Juan, jump in.
Oh, sorry. Thank you, Rob. As you can tell, we're dealing with this live. So thank you, everybody, for joining. Juan Orlandini. And in this session, as Rob mentioned, we're going to be covering some of the common things that we see in our clients, as well as what we've experienced ourselves. Well, you're facing disruption, increased demands of networks and clouds, need for data performance, an uncertain time frame for the implementation of lots of different kinds of things. But this, it's important to note that this is stuff that was happening before, and there was a lot of work that had been done ahead of this event that we're all living under. That really, what we were able to do is leverage some of that work to make ourselves and as well as our clients much better. So today what we're going to do is cover some use cases of some clients that we worked with. We worked with a civil engineering organization, a media conglomerate, and also a response that we had to do to this COVID-19 crisis for ourselves. So we'll be covering that. But before we get into that, we'd like to really get you a little bit more info on what are the things that you can be doing about it. So Jason, would you mind going through some of these events that are on here right now?
Sure. Thanks, Juan. I think, as you said, these types of things, regardless of the situation that we're currently in, were things that we can experience regardless of whether it's a pandemic or whether it's something else. The rapidly enabling remote workforce is something that happens all the time. And, those things, I think, as we all kind of went through with our own experiences and the things that we've done with clients over, we tried to put together for the folks on the phone, our clients, the right things to think about as far as these things go. I think, and we'll go, as we move forward through this, we'll talk about a lot of these things in depth. But, the nuts and bolts of it are kind of on this slide, right? We've got to equip those workers with the devices that they need to work from home, either rapidly getting those devices to the remote workers or enabling something like a device as a service capability where they can get that pushed down to them. I think at this particular point, a lot of folks start looking at the cloud capabilities. If they had been thinking about cloud beforehand and the capabilities from a collaboration perspective or from a scalability perspective or just a rapid deployment perspective, cloud looks pretty exciting when you've got a situation like this at hand, especially one that you've got to deal with rapidly. That whole scalability situation, then we get into a situation as well with how do we get support for these guys? How do we deal with our call center folks? Enabling folks that are used to going to a single site from a call center perspective, enabling them to have the same type of tools and capabilities remotely is definitely something that a lot of folks are looking at right now. And, I think you've probably heard about it talked about by a lot of folks, things that we didn't think we could do before because we've been pushed to do them regardless of the situation. Now we're doing them that way. Do we really want to shift back? Once we get all of this stuff pushed out, there's still those, I'm the security guy, right? So there's always a security aspect of the actual deploy as well as the after we've deployed. Are we following the appropriate procedures? Are we enabling capabilities for our workers to work that are auditable? Are there, devices that have capabilities on them, or to the licensing perspective, maybe there's some capabilities we can enable with some additional licensing on those, or maybe there's a capability that we can utilize with some of our manufacturing partners that we can get some provisional licensing set up so that we can enable some features for our workers on the go. And, those are the kinds of things that, and of course, it has to be secure across the entire aspect. Those are the kinds of things that as we roll this out, and there's actually a paper that we'll talk about later on that we kind of compiled a lot of this stuff together, the questions you should be asking yourself as you roll out and after you roll out related to kind of the capabilities that exist here. Any comments from you guys?
So, Jason, if I could jump in. So I think there's a few different flavors that you get here from a remote access perspective. And the user persona kind of drives the experience that you need to give them. If you've got some folks that already have devices that are mobile and used to moving around, it becomes a VPN type of conversation to get them access to their on-prem resources or access to resources in the cloud in a secure way. If you have workers that are used to being on a terminal in a physical environment, then it becomes more of that VDI type of conversation. How do you give them that remote desktop experience? And then lastly, I kind of look at the white glove, whether it's an executive or maybe it's an engineering type resource that typically works in a lab with a bunch of different devices, where you can actually do some stuff with Wi-Fi to put an access point at that remote location and give them a full on-prem experience, both wired and wireless, as if they were on the corporate network. So I look at this and kind of try and divide up the personas that we need to service in our environments and come up with the right solution. So there's always a mix of all these things. So I think that the devices are a part of it, whether it's physical devices or device as a service, the training that comes into play as we're bringing new things to the employees that need that experience, and ultimately the tools and capabilities that we need to put in place to give them the access to do their jobs on a daily basis. And sorry, Juan, if you want to jump in also.
Oh, no, it's totally fine. You're exactly right. The other thing that I would like to mention that Jason mentioned very quickly is that because of the situation we're in, we're seeing much more flexibility from our manufacturing partners and some of the licensing and some of the burstability that we can offer and work with you on to get you through, and then we can have, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, and then to get you to a more normal, steady state in the future when the crisis is over. So we'll cover some of that stuff, but this is all woven in together, and the important part is to make sure that there's a plan to make sure that you pick the right elements that are high value, low risk, that we can deliver immediately, but then go back and actually put this under a framework that makes sense. At this point, I think it might make sense to cover another one of our use cases that we have, or our first use case. And Jason, you want to comment on the civil engineering use case?
So this is Rob. I'll take this one actually. Yeah, so I really like this one. This goes to the point that this is stuff that we think about and address every day. This case study comes from before anything that started happening in the world recently. So last year we helped this civil engineering firm with a very remote workforce that needs to transfer very large CAD or BIM files. If you're familiar with something like Autodesk Revit or AutoCAD, they move these really large files between their sites, and it's very, very demanding. So they both have their headquarters as well as branch offices, but a lot of people working in the fields at construction sites and things like that. And as such, they needed a secure way to transfer this data, make it very effective for them. And they had already kind of gone down the path in a way, so they had VPN profiles already set up, and they had a VPN gateway already configured. That was a great start, and that's really kind of step one to enabling that remote workforce. As we talk about personas in the field, it got them to a place where they could have their remote users at those job sites connect back. But they wanted to take that to the next level and really mature what they were doing. So we helped them to implement a SASE solution. So SASE is Secure Access Service Edge, and is actually a term that Gartner coined last year, which is really the collision of network as a service and network security as a service. So you're bringing together things like SD-WAN with NetSec, with CASB, and various other components. So think of solutions like Palo Alto's Prisma Access or ForcePoint's DEP solution, where it secures that service edge, but also gives you a great connectivity back in a secure way. One of the other cool things about these solutions from a SASE perspective is the cloud native component to it. So because they do live in the cloud, it gives customers direct access into cloud environments with a lower latency and a better performance model than traditional network access mechanisms. So we really like that approach from a scalability perspective, and also ultimately in delivering the needs, especially for a customer like this that needed to transfer those large, heavy files across sometimes less than optimum links that may be commercial grade internet, things like that. So we've got a lot of different components going into this, and this is ultimately a customer that we look at as moving up the maturity scale as they were going through this type of transition and evolving their business. So you see the stats across the bottom, 800 employees in this particular organization, and really the cool metric that came away from this is the 40% reduction in corporate data center bandwidth. So no longer hairpinning traffic through a data center to get it to where it needs to go. They're able to pass that direct to, maybe it's one of the online file sharing resources, whether it be OneDrive or Box or Dropbox or something like that, pass that direct in the cloud as opposed to hairpinning it through the data center. So ultimately providing a much more effective type of network performance for the overall environment, being able to use that bandwidth for things that really need it at the data center as opposed to things that don't. So with that, I'll hand it to Jason and let you dig a little bit more onto the next components here.
Thank you.
So Jason is might be on mute. So let me talk a little bit about the top level of this stuff. So part of the remote workforce enablement is you got to make sure that you have all of the devices. And those could be BYOD devices, but there's also the possibility of rapidly acquiring them through a device as a service offering, or many other approaches. There's connectivity that needs to be established, and in one of our use cases that I'll talk about a little bit later on, we'll talk about how that could individually be challenging on itself. The cloud is a great enabler. There's ready tools and ready services that you can leverage to do that. We'll dig into that in a little bit. But it's very important that you make sure that your policies and procedures that you have in place get adapted to that. And all of that really lives under a security policy that needs to be understood completely, end to end, across the devices, your connectivity, your cloud, your policies, and all of that. We've heard many horror stories of healthcare facilities and even the World Health Organization being attacked now more than ever. And that's just, the criminals out there are taking advantage of this stuff, so security is more important than ever. And Jason, this is your world, the security side. You want to comment a little bit about all of that and how clients can make sure that they're making the right posture for across all of these different engines?
I would love to. Thanks, Juan. So I think, to Rob's point earlier, I thought he brought up a really great point that we really hadn't discussed beforehand, was that there's different profiles of users that you've got out there. You've got people that are used to sitting at a terminal and seeing the same screens all the time, and enabling those guys with new tools, not the same tools, but new tools so they can work remotely, has a certain risk associated with it. And I think what was interesting is the different hardware approaches that you can take, or different technology approaches that you can take to either, instead of enabling new tools for the users, but enabling new connectivity mechanisms so they can continue to use the same tools. I think that's a big, from a security perspective, a lot of change at the same time, and a user base that really isn't trained is something that can devastate an organization. Actually, it can just, even if it's not the ultimate in external security issues like data being exposed, it could be just a productivity from an availability perspective. People can't get their work done if you do a rapid deployment of tools that they have no mechanism to have support or anything on. And I think that was a great point that Rob had brought up earlier related to that. You really have to think about your user base and the people that you're empowering. It's much more than just that connectivity back to the main corporate net. If we just enabled VPN access back to corp, we're going to have a whole lot of bandwidth issues. But as well, if we never thought about the different type of profiles of the users that we've got, what type of applications they need access to, how their tools actually connect to the back end, we could open ourselves up to giving people a lot more access than they require. And of course, that leads to other potential things when folks don't follow the potential standards and policies that are in place. And that brings up, an interesting thing from a policy perspective. I think anytime workers are trying to do the right thing for an organization, they can inadvertently, if they haven't been briefed or haven't been made aware from a policy and training perspective, they could be making ethical choices for the company that are the wrong choices, meaning they did it unintentionally. So I think a good example is enabling a whole bunch of remote users at the same time with new devices, whether it be BYOD or if we rapidly deploy laptops to a whole bunch of users that are not used to working remotely. They may have preferences at home where they prefer to work a certain way. They want local copies copied down because they feel that that's a better solution for them from a bandwidth perspective. Split tunneling. There's all kinds of things associated with adding additional risk. And when these guys start creating new data based on the clientele that a lot of our organizations have, I'm certain that personally identifiable information perspective, as well as other regulated pieces of data that go on, and depending on where the clients sit from a GDPR or CCPA or other related privacy laws, you can get yourself into a situation that rapidly enabling your users was a really great idea, but not having thought it all the way through from a security perspective, it's more than just the enablement of those guys. So I think from a device perspective, BYOD can definitely save you, but there's an appropriate way to let users bring their own device and then secure the applications that they're going to be working within that device. I think cloud is also the savior to a lot. As I kind of alluded to earlier, cloud allows us to get some really rapid access to desktops, productivity tools, and those types of things. But if we just vanilla that out, enable those things, enable those users, hey, can everybody see the stuff? Can everybody work? Can everybody access your files? Great, and not think about it again. From a maturity model perspective, to Rob's point earlier, we're not done at that point. And I think that kind of is something that should be considered from an organization. It's more than just the enablement of the users. It's the long-term utilization of those tools and how we move forward into a maturity of that.
That's great. And Jason, No, that's great. But you know what? I think it would make sense if maybe we talked about this in the context of this client that we helped, and this was a COVID-19 based incident that really drove much of what you just talked about. Would you mind going over this this use case real quick?
Sure, of course. And I think, this is one of those we've got to rapidly enable users, and, at all costs kind of thing. Not at all costs from a security, let's sacrifice those things, but it's really going to affect our ability to transact, to do business the way that we do it. And in the example of an organization that's a media conglomerate, they've got clientele or client base that really needs to receive information. So they had to quickly respond to the situation, and they had specific state and federal guidelines that they had to adhere to. And, there's a 72-hour point at the bottom. In just 72 hours, we were able to enable these folks for all their endpoints, and in a very geographically dispersed situation, we were able to get all of these guys the access that they needed to this. One of the testaments to this being such a quick turnaround for these guys was they happened to be a managed services client of ours, so we already had some knowledge and access into their environment, so that rapid requirement gathering that we were able to do for these guys to be able to analyze the network beyond where we were providing some service for them, and to review the technology and their capabilities to be able to support that. And then the best way that we could enable these guys was to implement a very specific VPN technology to allow these guys to get back to the resources that they needed to do their job. And basically push that out as quickly as we did. We were really quite pleased of our ability to get these guys connected. But like I said earlier, this is step one in the maturity of this capability that's been issued out. Because to be quite honest, they might decide that this is a good model for them to continue to work through. Which kind of brings us to the next.
Sorry, Jason. If they do decide that, and that's actually, I just wanted to highlight that it's really important that might become the new norm, right? And that might become the new norm for many of us. And to do that, it's really, really critical that all systems involved in that new norm get reconsidered. And it's everything from the data center to the cloud to the devices to the security aspects that bind that stuff together. And it's one of the lessons that this client is taking is like, hey, we got everybody working again, which is phenomenal, and within 72 hours, which is an amazing stat. But now that everybody's working, let's make sure that we haven't put our systems under undue strain or in a mode where we are not able to support it in a sustainable way, right? And it might also be, and we'll talk about this later, that things will go back to normal, and then we go back to normal operations. But there's another event that kicks in. So there's an aspect of this where we have to ensure that these processes are repeatable and doable. And we can talk about that in terms of a framework. And maybe that's the best lesson learned from this is to go back and make sure that you take a deep breath, recenter, refocus on the best practices that we've always lived under, and work through that.
Perfect point. And I think, when we talk about business continuity, you're not done once you've gone to your offsite data center or your secondary data center. Switching back to your primary is just as much of a disruptive event. And again, that's something that has to be considered. And again, if there is a new normal, we've created some additional complexity there where we just can't go back to doing things the way that we did them before.
That's great. So, there's a framework, a maturity model that you mentioned, and we have a rather simplified version of it here as a diagram. Maybe we can talk about how that client stepped into, in essence, the second step over here. But maybe now it's time to go back to step one and rework through that. And Jason, this is something that you live and breathe every day. Do you mind sharing some of that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you said it nicely because I'm really a nerd on the maturity model here. And so the capability maturity model, which was really developed back at Carnegie Mellon, a while back, related more about software development. But we love to use it, and it's been adapted many times over for different technology things. But for the folks, just as a brief overview, if for the uninitiated folks, a maturity model typically starts with initial, then it goes to repeatable, then we go to defined, managed, and optimizing. That was the original model. They've modified it a little bit since then. So basically how we kind of adapted this kind of path from a rapidly enabling remote users perspective is there's that were we able to do it. We kind of call that the initial or ad hoc kind of way. We've got to give it set it up. We've got to be able to enable some users, repeat that to the point where we can enable those users, but getting it defined is a huge level from a maturity perspective. And we call that I think, in the way that we've kind of rolled it out is there's that rapid deployment, which is that initial kind of aspect of it. And we've rolled the defined perspective into that adapt to a new normal, whatever that is, because I really doubt that once we've responded in a way to a situation like this or others, whenever you've made some significant changes, that you may have to pull back some of that stuff. There's a new normal that exists, and we call that defined. And we call that new normal equals defined. One of the things that a lot of folks don't understand from when we go out and consult is they've done something. It's maybe repeatable to them, but they haven't defined it. And one of the definite maturity levels of any organization, regardless of the process, is once you have that defined, then you can scale it out. Then you can go to the next couple of phases, which is really where people want to be, which is that managed and optimizing side. So the point is, and I think this stands, as a consultant who's been doing this for like 25 years, I've never seen somebody who made this statement that they want to get to optimize the things that they're doing when they haven't already defined them. It's almost an impossible thing to do, to jump from the repeatable stage to optimizing. You have to define things out. And I think that's one of those critical things from not just from a security perspective, which is where I think about a lot of things, but just in general, how our standard operations, our standard way of rolling things out, our standard way of enabling the appropriate feature set, our standard way of support, our standard way of doing those types of things is where we get that defined phase. And then once you've got it defined, brilliant, because that's when, and in a situation from a security perspective like this, you've got a bunch of people in different locations now than they were before. You've got tool sets and capabilities that have been enabled that weren't enabled before. In my opinion, if that becomes the new normal, well, great. Now we need to get it locked in and do some type of audit or assessment on those things, because potentially, and I would say literally, not just potentially, there is a different security status of the organization at that point, and checking those things out and defining what those controls that are in place that had to be required based on the different classifications of the data that we have. Are they in place? Verifying those things and being able to prove that level of compliance, because we might be enabled for the short term. We've got everybody working, but we're not going to be able to keep that for the long run if it doesn't hit our compliance and regulatory requirements that we've got.
So, and I think one thing to add here, Jason, is really the customization that goes into this. We've put our model as far as what our methodology is down on a slide, but there's really a lot of customization that goes into this. I know you spend a lot of time with customers. I don't know if you want to touch on more of the detailed requirements and inputs that you look for as you go through the process to make sure that this is tailored to a specific customer, both in their technical needs and the strategic partners that they're working with from a product perspective, but ultimately the culture and organization that they're trying to drive to as well.
Dude, that's a great question. I love to talk about this stuff. I think you knew that. So I do think, one of my blanket statements that I always say, I'd love if there was a set of rules or things you got to do and do them this way that we could forward out to everybody, because we'd have done that and said, thank you, have a nice day. The thing about, in general, how we approach something like this is there's no macaroni and cheese recipe for it. We can't just follow these instructions and do it. It definitely, the way that we approach every engagement that we do with our clients is what are your business requirements? What are you trying to do? What, from a governance perspective, what do you have to adhere to? What are those goals of the board of the organization that they need to accomplish? How do they want to enable their clientele? How do they want to enable their users? It is a separate set and emotion. We can have some overarching frameworks that we typically follow, but I've never gone into an organization that just said, we follow exactly this and it's exactly this way, because to be honest, they'd be done at that point. It's much more difficult than that. So there's a lot of assessments, interviews that we would have to do to go in cold into an organization to be able to figure out exactly what they're trying to do. The thing that we also, it's important to us is whatever the motion that's going on within the organization. So I think, a situation like this is not this, and we're talking specifically about where we sit right now. This is potentially a disastrous situation for some folks, but in that particular environment, we don't have to stop the roadmap or the progression that we were trying to do as an organization anyway. So let's align what we were trying to do roadmap-wise anyway to enable additional capabilities for our clients, our user base, to deliver those capabilities to our clients, to get additionally better at proving our compliance issues. All of those things, we can figure those out and put an appropriate roadmap in place, because this is a roadmap. This is not going to be done. You're not going to say, oh, we did that last year. It's going to be an ongoing effort to continue to mature the organization, not just from a security perspective, but in general, from a capabilities perspective from the user base. And I think that's a beautiful thing when you can take all the initiative and the attention and the potential additional funding that's going to come from something like this and still advance the capabilities and security features that are available to your user base and your potential organization.
Jason, and those are great points. They're a little bit through the lens of the security world, right? Which is awesome. We absolutely have to have that lens at all times. That's core to everything that we do. But there's some tactical things that come into doing these things that are on the screen that we might want to talk about as well. The BYOD, mobile device management aspect of it, that's for some clients, that's been absolutely a no. That's turned into, yeah, let's do it right now, or asset deployments and acquisitions and all that. Or pulling from a supply chain that you've not had to lean on before. Endpoint security, VPN, virtual desktop infrastructures that might have also not been part of the picture in the past that are now required. All of that stuff is rather difficult technology in and of its own if you take it on rapidly, right? Part of the challenges that we're seeing from our client perspective is that adopting all of these different modalities of connectivity as well as interactivity are disruptive in terms of the education that has to go to the IT staff that supports them, as well as the end users that are maybe having to learn how to use a VPN, or maybe having to learn how to use a VDI, having to all of a sudden have a file sync and share solution that wasn't in place before, right? Interacting with cloud services that were not being utilized before, or rapidly increasing in utilization. Migrations to cloud-hosted productivity suites like Office 365 or one of those kinds of things. That's all really kind of challenging and difficult. And being able to lean on either a partner or some expertise that is publicly available is going to be incredibly important. That's my way of introing that at the tail end of this, we're going to point you all to a set of resources that we've put together for you that hopefully will help you be able to adopt a lot of these individual technologies in a very quick way and help you through this difficult time. Hopefully those resources will get you through there. If they don't, we're here to help. We really are more than capable of doing that. But the resources stand on their own, and hopefully you'll be able to take great advantage of that material as well. Before I move on to the next use case, Rob. Yes, sorry.
Thanks. Let me just take another. As I look at this list of technologies that's kind of out there and a couple of initiatives, I think one of the things that is worth saying at this particular point, because you brought up an interesting thought process. A lot of the things that are on these lists, especially like the mobile device management, the MDM stuff that's there, a lot of these things, actually, if I could look down every one of these things and see that there are terms that are in here that are older terms, terms that have been around for a while or technologies that have been around for a while. I think just about every single one of these, SIM, endpoint security, VPN capabilities, all of these things have some newer feature sets and technology capabilities that a lot of our clients weren't aware of. That because we stay super tight with all of our different vendors and partners that we've got out there, we know about the kind of the roadmaps of these guys. But if mobile device management might have turned a lot of people off back in the day, like you were talking about originally, but like mobile application management, where you only manage the applications that are pushed out from your company, better, maybe a solution that's more palatable for some folks. And I think along the lines, there's different features from an endpoint security perspective. We don't have to have these draconian policies that are put in place that take over somebody's device if they're trying to use it for mobile workforce. We can really do something that I think is just as secure, but also makes everybody feel well. And again, there's that whole user acceptance, acceptable use policy, and those things that are kind of the soft GRC type things that have to go down to make this very successful an organization. And again, we've done that for clients as well to help them embrace that new technology, not make them scared about it. Like if we're going to do SSL decrypt and those things, to let them know, hey, we're not looking at your medical records, we're not looking at your financial information, those kinds of things, because that user acceptance is very important as well. But I thought that was worth saying because we live in this every day, and when we look at these terms, we think, oh, we know what that is, and we know how it works right now with the latest and greatest. A lot of folks have looked at this before and haven't given it a look in a while, and are still maybe have a certain association with it the way that it used to be.
Yeah, that's
so. And just one thing I want to chip in on this is the fact that we've put this together in the way we have really allows you to break this down into more palatable chunks. So how do you take this a bite at a time and move through it? Because anybody that's going to try and compress this all together and say that I'm going to go from where I am today all the way through the end of the evolution in one big step is setting themselves up for some real pain. So whether I think everybody needs a strategy and a plan in place that breaks this up into the pieces, and the pieces are going to be different for everybody, but knowing what those strategic steps are along the way so that you can measure success, so that you can aid in the cultural adoption, I think is something else that's key. You guys have talked about MDM and the overall cultural feels about that over the last few years. And I think we just want to be cautious in the way that we approach this so that it's not just about the technology, it's about the people consuming the technology as well. So they have to be enabled, they have to be trained, and then they have to be comfortable with it to be able to get the outcomes that we're really looking for at the end of the day. So I think that's the summation for me that comes out of this, is making sure that we take this in palatable pieces.
That's how you eat the elephant.
Yep.
Well, speaking of elephants, let me talk about an elephant that hit us as part of this. We are a global organization, and we have facilities scattered all over the world that service our clients in different geographies. And one of our facilities was hit by a government-wide mandated lockdown. And we had over 800 teammates that were not set up to be remote workers. They were coming into a central office and working from a central office. And all of a sudden, we had to figure out how to enable all of those teammates to continue to do their jobs, but in a remote worker fashion. And we approached this through several different angles. One of them was to procure devices for them. So we were able to leverage our supply chain capabilities in our organization to procure hundreds of devices in a location that's very difficult to acquire them in the first place. And this included everything from laptops to mobile hotspots. Some of these users had no internet at home. We were also able to secure hotels, so some of the our teammates that couldn't work from home could stay at a hotel that was close to one of our offices, and following the best practices from the World Health Organization and the local municipalities, we were able to set up an office environment where they could come in and work from that office as well. So we had to do this all within 48 hours, and then, as I mentioned, it involved a variety of different things. We built out a secure multi-cloud VDI work-from-home environment. We created a new imaging system so that we could image laptops for the users that were getting new devices, or to re-image devices that might have owned. We created documentation and processes on how to work in this new mode. We had to go through user acceptance and testing to make sure that we are able to service our clients that were leveraging the services of this organization. For many of them, we had to create a vast VPN infrastructure and manage the burst in size and all of that comes associated with that. And it was amazing work. Within 48 hours, every one of those users was set up to be able to continue to do their jobs and to service our clients. It was a lot of learning that we did, but it was all built on stuff that we already had as a offering for our clients. So we didn't start from zero, and that's what really enabled us to do that within 48 hours, is we already had key services that were teed up that we were just doing as part of our regular business and offering to our clients. And it really fell into three categories. So the remote workforce, we have a whole organization within Insight that's dedicated to remote workforce enablement. We had cloud adoption for speed and scale. There's a whole organization within Insight that's what we do, right? And our security practice was obviously key and instrumental in making sure that we did this in a secure and reliable way. And again, we have a very large organization that's what they do. Many of the technologies that Jason and Rob were talking about earlier is the same stuff that we ended up implementing ourselves. So there was services from multiple cloud providers, multiple hardware technology partners, multiple security partners that were really deployed that let us do this at very quick scale. And it was very hectic 48 hours, but we got it done. And those lessons are something that we'd love to share with our clients and our teammates across the world. So given that go ahead, Rob.
Yeah. This is Jason. I think one of the things, that something like this kind of brings to light is, as we have stand-up calls related to how we're working on our own internal things like this, like the case study you just talked about, it really gets, there are portions of the business that you don't typically interface with a lot, and the logistics and operations folks were really impressive. I mean, again, just getting the hardware out and those kinds of things, dealing with the imaging and those kinds of things, that was an impressive thing that I was really thankful to be a part of that, to be able to see, the capabilities that were there, because, we sit on the sides of project plans and a lot of things like this, and rarely do we have an opportunity to do something in and of our own organization like this. And it was a interesting and exciting time that I'm glad, to report that it was very successful, but it was one of those things that let you appreciate all the different aspects of the business.
So, and as I mentioned, we don't want to just stand on what we did here. We wanted to make sure that we offered back to the community. So the team worked very feverishly over the last week or so to put together some resources that we'd love for you all to be able to take advantage. These resources are available at insightcdct.com, Stronger Together. We're constantly updating this material as we create it, as we learn, as we adapt to this new world. We also, Jason and his team created a practical guide to the security impact of enabling remote workers. There's a lot of gold nuggets in there that you can take for sure. We'd also like to make ourselves personally available. So if you look on the right-hand side of the slide, you'll see our LinkedIn profiles. Please feel free to reach out. We're all here to service you and to help you in any way that we can. We have the three for Jason, myself, and Rob, as well as for all of the Insight CDCT team. We'll be sending a copy of this presentation as a follow-up email, and it'll include all of these resources, plus a link to the webinar if you'd like to share this with anybody within your organization. So please feel free to use that as well. I've been monitoring the Q&A, and there's no Q&A right now. Lacking that, Rob or Jason, do you guys have any other final words that you'd like to add to this commentary?
I'd like to say, I really am pleased with the amount of activity that is around this. And I think one of the things related to the additional resources that you mentioned from my team and from the other teams, this has been a great kind of rallying cry for us to get those resources out. Again, not just marketing type material, but legitimate links to free resources that are out there for folks that find themselves in situations like this, regardless of the time frame. And we've got a lot of pieces that we've got that one piece of collateral that you mentioned from my team, but there are a lot of pieces in the work for that we're getting compiled, that this was a forcing function for. So that site, if you go there right now to look, you'll find definitely the pieces that we talked about, but keep checking back, and I know there'll be a follow-up email related to content that's going to be created and put up on there, but there will be a lot of content because this is important to us. We're real, I think I speak for all the folks on the phone that we're here because we believe in what we do, and this isn't some special information that we want to keep all to ourselves. We want to point everybody to those resources that are available out there because this, we're all in this together.
That's awesome. Thank you. Rob, any other final words from you?
Yeah, I think just want to reiterate that we're here to help, share our knowledge, share our experience with you. We're all in this together. I think that's the message that's critically important here. So our customers and our teammates are all in it, and we want to make sure that all the resources that they need to be successful are available to them. So that's part of this. And then beyond that, we've got a really strong team that we put together here at Insight. You've heard about the different components. Juan talked about the entire business organizations that exist to address the endpoint and the device and the training that goes with it. And then the data center and the cloud and the security aspects as well. So we've built some very, very strong teams over the years at Insight, and proud of those teams and everything that they've accomplished over those years. But on top of that, they're incredible teammates that rise to the occasion, and we've seen that happen day in and day out most recently. But that's honestly nothing new. They do that on a regular basis. So if you have needs, if you have challenges that you need to address, don't hesitate to reach out. Feel free to use that contact form on the site, or reach out directly, and we'd love to get together and help you out, figure out what the best way to approach the particular challenge you may be facing is, and help you navigate that. So with that, do we have any closing questions?
I got a nice comment, but
there
not a
question. Yeah, there's a comment,
okay.
and it's a thank you for our time. And no, thank you for your time. We know that hours matter now, and you taking the time to listen to us hopefully was very useful. And please feel free to reach out to us. We really are here to help. It's our honor to serve you, and look forward to working with you all. Thank you all. Thank you for participating, and thank you, Jason and Rob, for presenting.
And lastly, if you found this valuable, there'll be 2 more sessions related to this. If you want to forward that link to your colleagues, that's perfect. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you.
Awesome. Thank you all.